Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just to really get started, we really have an exciting audience with us today. I have the registration list in front of me, and all you guys are coming in from Australia, Germany, Hong Kong. We have people from India, Italy, Zimbabwe, Netherlands, Russia, Spain, United Arab Emirates, United States, United Kingdom. So we really appreciate you taking this time today to spend this afternoon or evening with us. And with that, I'd like to begin our webinar on doing business in India. So, my name is Anushri Shukla, and I'm a product manager at Tenders Info. We are a 19-year-old company that provides the entire span of information of international and domestic tenders, bids, contract awards, and projects covered from over 50,000 sources across 130 countries. We provide a lot of business opportunities, more of which we can definitely discuss with you guys later. So if you're interested, please do reply to us and follow up in our questionnaire that we will be providing after this seminar. But with that, we'd really like to begin today's webinar and do this by presenting our two panelists for today. We have Tarun Gupta and Bhavesh Mange. But before that, I just want to do some slight housekeeping. If you guys have any questions during this presentation, please type them into your Zoom Q&A section. So if you guys scroll up to your browser, you'll see an entire dialogue. And in that dialogue, there'll be a Q&A. So if you click Q&A, you'll be able to type any questions throughout our webinar session. And in addition, we have this feature called Raise Hand. So Raise Hand essentially will give you access to our live mic, and we will then pick and curate the questions that we want from you guys and grant you access to talk. So this will be in the last 15 minutes of our webinar. So stay tuned for that. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Now, without further ado, I'd like to present our first panelist for this evening. We have Mr. Tarun Gupta. So Mr. Tarun Gupta is the co-founder and CEO of TNA Consulting. He has over 18 years of experience in the field of corporate and investment banking and consulting. Tarun has a proven track record in promoting bilateral trade and investment between India and various countries across different continents. He leads a team of experienced professionals who have assisted over 300 overseas companies looking to do business in India. Tarun's prior experience includes Head of International Business Division at HSBC Bank, United Kingdom, and Regional Head of Corporate Banking for HSBC in India, running a wide profile of corporate customers operating in diverse industries. Thank you so much, Tarun, for joining us today. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you. Take it away, Tarun.
Thanks a lot, Anushri, and for this wonderful introduction. And also, we are very pleased to collaborate with Tender Info on this initiative. So ladies and gentlemen, big thanks from my end for joining this. As we move on the various slides, we have already achieved one big thing. We have started on time, which is always nice. So whichever part of the world you are in, that's one thing which you will always remember in India is do not assume everything starts on time. So that's the first pitch on doing business. And second, I start with a health warning that in India, we love to talk in terms of we talk the longest on the phone. And this is to do also with the fact that we have the lowest cost of internet and mobile data in the world. So as a result, it's a challenge to stick to time. So yeah, I talk about diversity. What do I mean by diversity? It's not only the 26 national languages, the cuisine, but what is the economic significance, the languages, the 845 dialects, number one reason for putting diversity is the diversity in wealth distribution. In terms of Gini's coefficient in India, 1% of the population controls 56% of the country's wealth. So, and the most affluent class in the world lives cheek by some of the dire poverty. Second, our economic development in India is not uniform. A lot of development in India is around the arc of Western and Southern India. So if you see on the map, the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is the most populous state of India with a population of about 200 million people, really the size of Brazil population, but its GDP is only the size of Qatar, which is the population of 2 million. So second message on this slide is that the diversity within states can be as high as 6 to 7 times from one state to the other. And also the ease of doing business in different states varies considerably. The per capita income varies considerably. The state of infrastructure could be very different. And even the employee availability and the skill set could be very different. So whenever as a company you're viewing India, please view India as a heterogeneous geography, and thereafter take a decision which part of India. And another important point is some companies do get overawed. Oh, India is so big, right? How do I enter? No, the pockets of consumption, which is driving the India growth story, is really limited to about 20 odd cities. India has about 50 cities with a population of over 1 million. But you look at all major points of consumption, primarily it's restricted to 20 cities. So if you're selling consumer products, right, you don't need to be overawed. As long as your distribution reach can take care of about 20 cities, you're really taking care of a significant portion of the population. So moving on to the other slide. Just bear with me. Yeah. So we've celebrated over 70 years of independence. And why I have this slide is how have we done as a country, right? Over the last 7 decades. You know, when we got our independence, nobody gave us a chance. How will this country with an illiteracy of over 70%, how will this country survive? How will this country have the equal franchise when we were one of the first countries to start with equal franchise? So how will this country, you know, start with giving democratic rights to everybody? We've not done too badly, right? We've crossed a very important milestone wherein our per capita income has touched about $2,000. And if you look at any country's economic development graph, once a country crosses about $2,000, that's where it moves from survival to consumption. So ladies and gentlemen, a big theme of my presentation today would be how India consumption story is the biggest draw for foreign companies. And I will talk in detail more on this consumption story and what are the key factors behind this increase in consumption story. Okay, so the GDP growth rate, you look at we've had a bit of, when we call in India a bit of slump, we look at anything below 7% is something we are not happy with. And our growth rate has been in the band of 6 to 8% broadly. Now, my next question is, either we can be very pompous and we can be very satisfied that we are growing at the fastest major economy in the world. Our growth forecast for next year is above 7%, thereafter also above 7%. My question is that sufficient? Answer is unequivocal no. Our Prime Minister has set a clear target that as a country, we are currently at about 2.7 trillion economy. We have set a target to be a 5 trillion economy by 2024 and a 10 trillion economy by 2032. What does that mean? That means that we need to grow at above 7% for the next 5 years and above 8% for following 5 years. And let me just put one comparison to rest here. Everywhere India is compared to China. This comparison was valid probably 3.5 decades ago. In 1980, India and China were both at a per capita income of about $300. I repeat, similar $300. Fast forward to 2018, India is about $2,000, China is about $7,000. China's GDP is about 5 times that of India. Why am I giving these figures? The reason is to make sure we give the right size of the Indian middle class. People say, companies tell me, I want to come to India because it's a 1.2 billion population. Yes, it's 1.2 billion population. But what is your size of the market? And that is an important assessment each company needs to make. Are we looking at the top of the pyramid in India? Are we talking about the middle class? If yes, what is the size of this middle class? But very, very rarely have I come across a company which is targeting whole 1.2 billion. Most of the companies today are looking at the Indian middle class. Now, how do we define a middle class, right? Indian middle class is defined by one of the definitions of World Bank also, is any household income with a population of, with an annual household income of about $10,000 plus. It's estimated India has anywhere between 50 to 60 million such households. So the middle class comparison, which has to be noted, is the fact that in India, the middle class is about 300 million, 250 to 300 million people. That's an important assessment. At the moment, majority of the consumption is limited to 5% of the Indian households. I repeat, 5% of the Indian households. If, ladies and gentlemen, you can take away one figure from today's seminar, it is this 5% of India's household. And what do I mean by 5%? 5% of the Indians pay taxes, income tax. 5% of the households have cars. 5% of the households in India have air conditioners. 5% of the households invest in equities. Just over 5% take overseas holidays. I can go on and on. But the big change happening is this 5% is projected to become 25% of the households. And this is the real reason why the overseas companies want to have a base in India to capture to this middle class. So what you have in your graph is that at the moment on purchasing power parity, India may be the smallest, but by far it is expected to have the world's largest middle class by 2030, which is the #1 reason for overseas companies to look at India. Moving on, what has the government been doing, right? How has been the political situation in India? And does it impact this government? We've had coalition governments prior to 2014. We've had coalition governments for the last 30 years. First time in 30 years in 2014, we had a government with a clear majority in our lower house, which elects our prime minister in our federal structure. Is it important? I think without having any political affiliations, it is important because it shows the changing aspirations of the country. For over 7 decades, our elections have been fought on very narrow ideologies, ideologies of religion, caste, in terms of regionalism, in terms of languages. But really, 2014 was a watershed year when elections were fought on the basis of economy, right? And we had the first time a government which we got a single majority. So did this government do anything, right? And they've recently got re-elected again with a bigger majority. I will talk about very briefly these areas which have an direct impact on doing business in India. First of all, when this government came in 2014, we were ranked 142 on ease of doing business by the World Bank. We moved up to 100, and last year we moved up to 77, with a stated aim to be amongst the top 50 during this term. Ladies and gentlemen, from 142 to be 77 and top 50 as you would all agree, is a significant achievement. There is no country in the world who's moved so high in ease of doing business in such a quick time. So what has been and NAMO is an acronym for our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister loves acronyms. So what has the government done? One, the government has done on the social parameters, not so glamorous parts of India, but very important. Nobody wanted to talk about poor sanitation in India. And I'm not embarrassed, but factually, it's a bit, the fact was India had open defecation, lack of toilets. Last 5 years, we have built nearly 100 million. The figure says 92 million. It's close to 100 million toilets. It has an impact on healthcare. And so the 100 million toilets have been built. First time ever, we have a health policy which covers 100 million families, about 500 million people, where every family below the poverty line gets an annual health insurance of USD $7,500. Is this important? Yes, because in India, health insurance penetration is about 20-25%. India has the second highest out-of-pocket spend on healthcare outside of Iraq. We spend amongst the closest percentage of GDP on healthcare. And third, a lot of our women used to cook using wood in villages. That used to cause health problems. In 5 years, we've given over 60 million women this freedom from choking their lungs, and they've got access to gas cylinders. This target has been revised to 80 million. So these are on raising the quality of life. Then, of course, a big change was on the bankruptcy code. God forbid you are stuck in any litigation in India. That's one of the reasons we are ranked 163, because of 35 million court cases pending in India. We had first time the bankruptcy code, and in India's history, we had 300 companies which were liquidated, 80 companies which are still under restructuring. As a result, there is more sanctity to contract. And the other big change is India as a market was 29 different states. And now we've got one uniform taxation, which is goods and service tax. Is this taxation perfect? Answer is no. Is it better? Significantly better. We have multiple levels of goods and service tax, 0%, 5%, 12%. It's getting better, and it has really created efficiencies. And what big impact it has had is on logistics cost. Today, logistics cost in India are about 15% of our GDP, 15 to 16%. We want to bring it to less than 10% to make the economy more competitive. So these are some of the areas on 2014 to 2019. And what is the next push? I already spoke about a 5 trillion economy. Simplification, we are hoping that the number of levels of taxation comes down. One big area I want to talk about today is on infrastructure. So if anybody has been to India, you would agree, we could do with some improvement in infrastructure. Improvement in our roads, railways, airports, ports, right? I won't talk about the road driving discipline, but I will talk about the infrastructure. So when the government just understand the impact what is having. Currently, we spend about $100 billion annually on infrastructure. The government has said that we will triple. I repeat, we will triple this run rate, and we will aim to spend about $300 billion annually on infrastructure. So where will this money go? This money will go in building 60,000 kilometers of highway. To give you an idea of all the national highways existing so far, 30% were built in the last 5 years. We are currently building highways at the rate of about 28 kilometers a day, and we want to take it up to 40 kilometers a day. Second initiative, we want to improve our railways. Out of this $300 billion, about $60 billion annually will go into railways, whether it's setting up high-speed lines, modernizing 600 stations, electrification of entire railway line, and doubling of port capacity. We have a project to double the port capacity to 2.5 billion tons. Airports. No country in the world has had a double-digit growth rate in domestic aviation than India. For 52 consecutive months, India has had a double-digit growth rate. And today our domestic travelers are touching 150 million passengers. I'm not talking about some of the other initiatives. So infrastructure spend is one big area where we see companies coming to the Indian story. So this is some of the numbers. One of the things which I didn't speak about is about 50 cities. We are also setting up metro networks. And if you go back to what I said earlier, why 50 cities? Because we have about 50 cities with a population of over 1 million. Now, for some of our European friends, this may look a large number, or an Australian friends, but in China, the similar number is 350. So China has 350 cities with a population of over 1 million. I want to bring about one aspect which I did not cover. If you look at any spiel on India, everybody talks about demographic dividend. I use the word demographic challenge in India. India has the youngest population in the world. We have a median age of about 28, 29, and about 2/3 of our population below the age of 35. Excellent. We have the largest working age population till year 2040. From a foreign company perspective, that's good because it provides you with access to potential workforce. But the challenge for India is this workforce educated enough? Is this workforce skilled enough? And that is where, as a country, we are struggling, and we need to build up our capacity in education which is relevant to industry, in vocational skills which are relevant to industry. So that comes with a challenge and also an opportunity. Coming back to renewable energy. Before I move on to renewable energy, let me give you a perspective on where do we stand in terms of energy consumption. In India, what we have is about what I call it is per capita energy spend. We lag significantly. We have about 18% of the world's population, and we consume about 6% of the world's energy. We have made significant strides in our capacity. Today, we have about 350,000 megawatts of installed capacity, and about just roughly about 80 gigawatts of renewable capacity. How does it look? Is this attractive? Let me share with you that since the beginning of 20,000, the solar capacity in India has increased by 1,000 times. Okay, and the entire renewable capacity has increased by about 42 times. But the government has set very ambitious target. It has clearly set a target that we need to reach about 175 gigawatt by 2022. So nearly doubling of our existing capacity. And this would require investment of about $100 billion. So clearly, renewable capacity is a big pillar of investments. And in India, we've taken steps on rooftop solar. We have taken steps on central solar. And we've also taken steps on building energy storage capacities. We've identified over 200 sites for wind energy. So really, and also in terms of tariffs, today India has some of the lowest solar tariffs prevalent anywhere in the world. But like any other opportunity, I would also like to give you a balanced view. One of the big challenges, what we are facing, is some of the long-term contracts, some of the state governments are renegotiating. So that's been an unpredictability. Moving on, automotive sector. If there are two sectors in India which have been globally competitive in manufacturing, it's been automotive and pharmaceutical. Today, more than 2/3 of our automotive component exports go to the OECD countries. This sector accounts for over $20 billion of FDI and is amongst the largest contributor to our manufacturing sector. In fact, as you see, it contributes nearly 50% of our manufacturing GDP. Okay, and you see the figure of 30 million vehicles being produced in India. Majority of it is two-wheelers. We produce about 20 million two-wheelers, about over 20 million, we produce about 3 million cars, yeah, and which are the market in India. And you see the breakups in terms of the productions we have, which you see on the graph. But why I have put this slide is that this industry has recorded its biggest downturn this quarter. In fact, if you look at today's newspaper, we've had to shed thousands of jobs. And the reason for this is this industry is making a big challenge on shift from to electric vehicle. Government has set a target, not a hard target, but a vision that by 2030, 80% of our two-wheelers would be electric, 70% of our commercial vehicle would be electric, 30% of our cars would be electric. And do you want to know what's the penetration rate today in cars? It's 0.1%. So that's another area. Second, in terms of the big industry in India is pharmaceuticals. India has largest number of US FDA approved plants outside of the US, which is 200 FDA approved plants. We account for 40% of the US generics. India is the #1 producer of generic medicines. What are the two big opportunities? India has a domestic growing pharmaceutical industry, and Indian companies are moving towards complex generics, branded drugs, complex molecules. And clearly, the US continues and Europe continues to remain the biggest market, but new growth markets are Latin America and Asia Pacific. Medical devices, here we lack in terms of it's import dependent. 70% of the demand is met through imports. What we produce is a lot of it is consumables. Look at our spend on medical devices, $4. Global average, $66. And even Brazil, I was recently in Brazil. In Brazil, the spend is about $20. So if you're looking at medical devices, we get a lot of interest from companies who are looking to begin with exports, but looking to set up thereafter in India. Education and training, I hinted at that we have a huge capacity gap. To give you an idea, we are currently sitting at a gross enrollment ratio of about 23-25%. If government has set a target that we want to double this gross enrollment ratio to 50% by 2030. Now, if we need to do it by 50%, we need to be setting up 20 universities, 700 colleges every month, month on month for the next 20 years. That is not going to happen. So what is going to happen is we are going to use technology, and we are going to account for a higher share of students going outside to India to study. Currently, India sends about 350,000 students annually. Half of them go to the US. So that's another area where we are seeing newer countries, be it Eastern Europe, traditionally Canada, Australia, UK, New Zealand have been the biggest destination, but that's a big change we are seeing. And also, we are seeing companies coming in the education service industry. So that's the next slide we talks about. We have about 900 universities, about 40,000 colleges. And clearly, that's an area on the vocational side. Our capacity is about 5 to 10 million every year, whereas China is about 90 million. This brings me to the second last slides. Some of the unique, what I have mentioned may appear generic, but I'm very happy to go into some of these details. We spoke about regionality. The biggest mistake anybody can do is assume India is a homogeneous market. As I always say, there is a product, there's a price point for every product in India. And depending on the market you're focusing on. Third is, quite often we demand customization. And this is something I speak to a lot of our European clients. We could do with a lot of bells and whistles. Maybe they're not required in India. For example, Toyota, when they built up their model Etios, they started up ground zero to build up that model. Today, India is a base for entering Latin America, Africa, Asia. But because we really are the most cost-conscious country in the world. I told you the cost of data has fallen by 1/20th in India. The big changes, what we are seeing in India is digitization, is expansion of consumer class, is formalization of economy. We are seeing more companies. At the moment, India has been a mom and pop retail story. India has been an SME story. So this is something which is changing, and this is which requires, and we love our bureaucracy. That is one thing which sometimes causes challenge, but we are getting better. And so be prepared for a lot of paperwork. And I would end by saying that if you look at any analysis, most of the foreign companies have had profitability in India. It's one of the most open markets in terms of not requiring a local partner, but India is not a dip in, dip out market. Before you take that decision, please ask, do you have the management bandwidth? It would require management resources. But as long as that commitment is there, and as long as the focus is on the right product with the market segment, most of the companies we've seen, they look at an incubation period of 18 to 24 months. So this brings me, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of my slide. And as a firm, we've been working across the globe really. Primarily our clients are from Europe, US, and Asia Pacific. And after the end of the presentation, once the second panelist has spoken, I'll be happy to take any questions. Feel free to ask. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. That was really insightful. I think you really provided an entire rundown of the India market and economy. We talked about Narendra Modi's past term. We spoke about his future progress that he has built for India. We discussed the challenges in the current infrastructure and the crux of educating citizens with relevant industry experience while emphasizing a need for vocational skills. We also discussed renewable energy as being a huge investment in India. Energy storage capabilities are large in solar and wind, solar being the lowest tariff in India. After the United States. We are the second largest FDA approved plants after the United States, and we also touched upon the educational capacity of India, ending with a beautiful 8-point strategy for successful India market, which as mentioned is and should be customized for each product and sector. So with that, thank you so much, Tarun, for really providing that excellent breakdown of the India market for all our participants here today. I'd like to move to the second part of this webinar and introduce our second speaker. Can everyone see the slides? Hopefully, if not, then do add to the chat. And again, another housekeeping rule that if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Please add to the Q&A panel, Q&A section. And, you know, in the last 15 minutes, we'll definitely get to you. So with that, we'd like to now introduce Mr. Bhavish Mange from Tenders Info. Bhavish is a tax consultant with over 10 years of experience in helping companies understand the regulatory framework and tax compliances in India. He's helped businesses, organizations, and enterprises to look at the legal and tax aspects when setting up their business units in India, such as GST laws, income tax laws, FEMA regulations, RBI approvals, and so on. Thank you so much, Bhavish, for joining us. And with that, I'd like to give it and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anushri, for a brief introduction. Tarun gave a very detailed economic overview of Indian economy. Now let me take you through the tax and legal aspects. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to briefly highlight the various laws and regulations that are required to be taken into consideration while deciding upon setting up the office or doing business in India. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to familiarize you all with the different laws applicable to the foreign business entities in India. Let us take them up one by one and understand the impact of it. So can we have a next slide, please? Yeah. So over the slide, you can see the various laws and regulations applicable for entities, doing business in India. So let's take them up one by one. Uh, First, I'll be taking up with the FDI rules and regulations. So basically, the foreign direct investments that has to come into Indian market needs to go through the FDI rules and regulations. The setting up business in India or investing in India by non-residents requires conformity with India's foreign exchange regulations, specifically the regulations governing FDI. See, most aspects of foreign currency transactions with India are governed by FEMA and the Foreign Direct Investment Policy, that is FDI policy of India, issued by the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, that is called DIPP, in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. There are various sector-wise restrictions under FDI policy, which one should know about, the shareholding of the non-resident in the Indian company. So there are various, regulations which talks about the restrictions. There are certain prohibited sectors, like, there are various sectors: atomic energy, railway operations, chit funds, Nidhi company, trading in areas, manufacturing of cigars and tobacco, etc., where the foreign direct investment is totally prohibited. So one cannot invest in these sectors which are the prohibited one. And apart from this, there are other sectors which are not prohibited, but of course, they have the ceiling of a certain percentage of investment that one can make. So there are different sectors where, the different limits are set. Like, in a banking sector, 74% of the FDI can be invested, 51% in the multi-retail trading, and so on. And apart from that, there are 100% investment sectors where FDIs are allowed, but those are subject to certain rules, regulations, and the approvals from different authorities. See, government in their Union Budget 2019 also mentioned about further opening up of the FDI in aviation, media, animation, and insurance sectors. So in the last budget, the finance minister talked about opening up the various avenues for the different sectors where, it was previously not allowed, but the 100% FDI will be allowed now onwards and will be permitted for the various sectors like insurance sectors, insurance intermediaries. So in the insurance sectors, 100% FDI is not available, but for the mediatories like insurance intermediaries, for them, the 100% FDI will be allowed from now onwards. So this was, talking about the FDI rules and regulations. Let me move forward to Foreign Exchange Management Act. So what do you mean by FEMA? See, Foreign Exchange Management Act was introduced in 1999 to repeal the draconian law of Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, which prohibited, almost all the transactions, coming from the abroad in terms of the currency exchange. But the FEMA is the most facilitator of the act, which facilitates rather than regulate the exchange of the currency. So the transaction in foreign currency in India is totally regulated by the FEMA Act. So one should know before investing in India, what kind of regulations and how the currencies can be brought into India as a capital infusement or as a working capital on the different investment criteria. Based on that, you need to evaluate what are the things under which the current account and the capital account transactions are allowed, and what are the various limits under which the different transactions and the purpose of based on the purpose of the transaction, those transactions are limited. So there are various rules and regulations pertaining to current account and capital account transactions. The violation of the FEMA laws and regulations is a civil offense, of course. So one need to be very thoroughly, know about those rules and regulations. FEMA is a regulatory mechanism that enables RBI and the central government to pass regulations. So the governing body is the RBI and central government, and related to the foreign exchange in tune with the foreign trade policy of India. So basically, the RBI regulates the currency exchange in India regarding the investment in India. So now I'm just moving on to the next one, the international tax treaties. So let me talk about what are these treaties. So India has different treaties with different parts of the different countries, where India has the largest network of tax treaties for the avoidance of double taxation and prevention of tax evasion. So whenever any foreign company would like to do business in India, and also have their presence in their local country, they don't have to go through the double taxation kind of a problem to evade that or evade the tax or curb the practice of double taxation. This kind of treaties are into existence. So India has DTAA with over 85 countries under Section 90 of Income Tax Act 1961. This treaty supersedes the local provisions of law and give the advantage over the local laws and give benefits of the tax percentage and relief in the tax. Based on these treaties, one should understand the various clauses of tax treaties. A government of India has entered with the different countries and the various laws and regulations in order to understand the implication of DTAA. DTAA simply mitigates the double imposition of tax when there is a cross national flow of income and ensures tax neutrality. So the agreement between the negotiating country provides specific guidelines on how the income generated in one country and transferred to another is to be taxed by the source and resident country. So this ensures the protection to taxpayers against double taxation and prevent any deterrence that the double taxation may otherwise promote in the free flow of international trade, investment, transfer of technology between two countries. Foreign or non-resident companies operating in India are subject to withholding tax on their income. So any kind of dividend distribution, interest, royalty, or fees for technical services as prescribed under the Income Tax Act is required. No, the entity is required to withhold the tax. So there are provision of withholding tax. However, foreign companies that are resident in the countries that India has DTAA with can claim more beneficial provisions and rates between the IT and DTAA. So I'll just move on to the direct tax, that is Income Tax Act 1961. So all the incomes accruing in India of foreign companies investing in India, we need to have knowledge about the rules and regulations and impact of Income Tax Act 1961. So direct taxes in India is governed by the Income Tax Act 1961. It is the major source of revenue for the government of India. The direct tax collection in India accounts for around 51% of the total tax collection. Every year in the month of Feb, Union budget is presented in the Parliament by the Finance Minister to present the changes brought out in the Act. So every year there would be amendments and changes in this Act, and one need to know the current applicable tax rates and the tax provisions embedded by the Union Budget 2019, promoted by the Government of India. The foreign entities in India are taxed at 50% of income consisting of royalty or fees for technical services. So imagine the kind of the taxation that is there. Of course, that is high than the other countries, but 50% is for the royalties, fees, and technical services. And for the rest of the other incomes, it is 40%. And apart from the income tax, there is a surcharge of 2% if the income of the resident company is between 1 crore, exceeds 1 crore, but does not exceed 10 crore. So there, over and above the tax, one need to pay 2% of surcharge, and 5% if the income exceeds 10 crore, and health and education says of 4% on the tax plus surcharge part. So one can, conclude that what is the effective rate? Summing all the tax plus surcharge plus health education says one need to pay 42.43% of income tax as per Income Tax Act 1961. So an enterprise, a foreign enterprise doing business in India is required to pay 42.43% of tax on their net income that they generate. So now let's move on to the indirect taxes. I'll just briefly give you the last one, which is the major tax reforms. After the Modi government came into the power in the year 2014, the major tax reforms happened in India was introducing GST in the entire country. GST is the biggest tax reform in the history of India to replace various acts like VAT, service tax, entry tax, etc. to become a single tax. So the idea of Modi government was one nation, one tax. This was brought in by Modi government in the year 2017, and the law is applicable from 1st July 2017. Under GST tax regime, the GST on supply of goods and services are required to be charged as per different rates. That is from 5% to 28% based on the commodities. See, total indirect tax collection after the introduction of GST increased drastically in the country to touch the record high of 1.06 trillion in Indian rupees in the month of March 2019, with the overall collection of 11.77 trillion in the year 2018-19. Summing up all these tax provisions, I hope you must have got the highlight of the rules and regulations pertaining to the various tax structures in India. Of course, we can go into the detailed one. And if you have any kind of questions or you need an advisory on any of these parts, you can really we'll be happy to help you. We have a team of members and experts in different domain and subject matters from this various acts. So one can find one can seek advisory or consultancy on that matter and can write it to me. I'll be happy to help you out. Thank you very much. Thank you for patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhavesh, for giving us an entire breakdown of the taxation laws in India. I know it's actually a very vast topic, and if you would like, if anyone over here would like to kind of further discuss, he's more than happy to answer questions. Again, we are now opening the Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, we can kind of begin from there. But with that, we would like to now open to Q&A. So I have a question for Mr. Tarun. Tarun, you talked about some best practices. You spoke about India's middle class sector and how that is the sector that needs, the sector where a lot of capabilities for progress is really needed. So what are some best practices to study the needs of India's middle class while sitting overseas? For many of our audience members today, they might not be able to visit India, but they would want to invest in India's middle class. So can you give us some best practices?
That's a great question, Anushri, because as I mentioned, that's one of the biggest attractions of India. And let me just give you the context, how things have changed. One of the biggest challenges for any overseas companies historically in India has been the distribution, right? I have a product and I see a question from an Italian producer on the Q&A. How do I look at targeting the middle class, right? What has changed in the last 5 years is that we have taken a quantum leap from being a mom and pop retailer, which we still are, to a digital economy. Today, there are about 50 to 60 million people who buy online. About 500 million people access the internet on their mobile, but about 50 to 60 million people, they are the consuming class. As a result, we have a lot of these intermediaries, if I use the word as marketplaces, like Amazon. For Amazon, their second biggest investment outside of the US is now India. And Walmart recently acquired the largest Indian online company, Flipkart, for a $16 billion acquisition. So as a result, what we are seeing is that Indian companies are able to use some of their potential partners who in turn can ride on this wave of fulfillment centers and cater to this middle class. So they really do not need to build in their distribution channel, provided they can route their consumer product through these online channels. So that's number one big change which we have seen. Earlier, you had to appoint distributors, sub-retailers. That's still the case in certain products. But when we are talking about B2C, that is a big change. And second area, where how we've seen companies looking at best practices. You don't want to bet your farm on India, right? You want to start small, right? You could start with a small sales office, which could be fully owned or in partnership, and really make sure that your one person, that sales manager, is building up, and that's particularly relevant for B2B. It's building up your partner network, your B2B network across India. And third, do a more in-depth market assessment towards making sure that the product is the right fit for India. Here, I would like to share the example of a chocolate manufacturer with whom we worked. They invested a lot on providing refrigeration coolers to all the retailers, but still the chocolate was being melted. What they didn't realize that the shop owner was switching off the refrigerator at night to save on electricity, right? So there are instances like these, and to making sure that these nuances are considered and any modifications in the product and supply chain is understood and delivered.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that question. We have one more from you. Andrew Dixon, thank you for asking this question. We have Andrew Dixon asking, how can we find good local partners? So Tarun, could you answer Mr. Dixon?
Yeah, that's a question we get asked very often. I first say how not to find a good local partner, first of all. Quite often I've seen companies making a mistake where they meet the first Indian company on a trade show, who's very, very interested, it seems, and he or she is appointed as a local partner. That is lesson 101 on not to appoint a local partner, because quite often a lot of Indian companies are trophy collectors, where they want to collect the mandate of a distributorship and do nothing about it. So how to find is, first of all, important is make that effort to come to India, okay? And effort to come to India and making sure that you've understood whether that prospective partner, like we do a lot of partner search mandates. So how we do is we try to understand, does this partner have a potential reach in the customer segment? Do they have the distribution reach? And more importantly, understand the mindset, okay? Do they have the mindset to work ethically, to making sure that they're not asking everything in advance payment and then not even bothering to respond to emails or calls? So understanding, and that requires, and where we've seen a big change in India is that the younger generation, which has quite often studied abroad and understand the reputational impact, are more professional and they understand the value of long relationship. So to summarize, do not appoint the first company you meet as your local partner. Take that effort to come to India, assess the distribution reach, the customer reach of the partner, assess the professionalism and whatever possible, the mindset towards ensuring that the customer is in for the long run, and what is the roadmap and how will be the sharing of expenses would be required if it's a brand product. Hope that answers. I'm happy to add any additional information.
No, I think that definitely answered the question on, what to see, and Andrew is also saying thanks, very helpful. So one other question that we did have was, what's the biggest challenges? You did kind of summarize this in your presentation, but what are the challenges in entering business in India, and how can agencies like Tenders Info help in building different seeking out different project information?
Okay, I'll answer this question in two parts. I've already spoken about infrastructure challenges, some of the bureaucratic challenges, some of the challenges related to the skill set. Okay, and I see also another question on engineer salary, which I will address. I think organizations like Tender Info, it's important to understand who is the paying party, what is the customer profile, right? Are we looking at only government opportunities? Then quite often L1 becomes a big challenge, which is the lowest price. Are we looking at opportunity where even for government projects, maybe is the foreign company can be a subcontractor to a large Indian company so that the paying party is an Indian company? Then the other challenges are in terms of salary expectations. Yes, India is a low wage economy, but it's the wage inflation tends to be about anywhere between 8 to 12%. And where companies come to India is also, there is a huge wage arbitration at the entry level. Okay, so if you look at the successful service models, manufacturing models, it's really pyramid shaped, where there's a huge pool of people at the entry level. And there the salaries in the global terms are competitive. You're talking about a starting salary of an engineer, annual starting salary package being about less than $10,000, more in the range of about $7,000. And as engineers move up, and especially in the information technology industry, we use a thumb rule in terms of, so let's say we are talking about an engineer salary of 10 years. So in dollar terms, you're talking about $20,000 as the annual salary, roughly, as a benchmark. So the challenges, apart from these, is biggest challenge we always see is to, apart from the partner selection, have I understood my target segment? That is, Anushri, has been the biggest challenge, where companies have overestimated the size of the market. Any other questions?
Yes, no, that makes sense. I think you were able to give us an understanding of how people kind of rethink, or rather they don't study their target demographic enough, they don't study their target market enough, which can cause to a lot of challenges, and making presumptions doesn't really help. So we have one other question from Lydia Milesi. Lydia Milesi is an Italian producer, and she's asking a question on how to enter the India market as an Italian producer. And maybe just to add to that, how can she improve or be a value add in India as an Italian producer?
Anushri, it would be great if I could get some idea on the product segment, because that would help us give a more specific view.
Okay.
If you could request.
No, that actually makes sense. So we will request Lydia. Lydia, if you're listening, if you can tell us what segment you're coming from, then that will be more helpful and for us to give you a better look down and rundown on the industry. We have two other questions that have just come in. Sandra Moreno is asking, land acquisition required for the airport expansions in India are taking too long. So do you expect any change on this issue? If you could answer that.
Sure. And Sandra, you've rightly identified a very touchy topic in India. There are two holy cows, and I say it with a pun intended, in India. One is the farmer and second is land. India is one of the most land-starved country, right? We have 18% of the world's population and 2.6% of the world's land mass. The cost of land often in India is significantly high as part of the project cost, be it for your retail operations, be it for manufacturing plant. So now coming to the land acquisition policy, government made it more complicated when we had the new land acquisition policy. And it's in a bit of self-imposed challenge. However, we see some green shoots, and I'll elaborate why. A lot of state governments, they have become more proactive, where when they're allocating projects, they have done fair bit of land acquisition before even going out for financial closure. And they have improved the package which is available to the farmers. And this is, and I would quote the example of the airport. Today, the Delhi region is building up a second airport in the state of Uttar Pradesh, about 75 kilometers from the current airport in Delhi. And they've really made the whole compensation package more transparent. It was a hotbed of corruption. So as a result, more farmers are willing to give up their land. Land titles are improving. And also, as part of the package, as one of the states of Andhra Pradesh has shown, the farmers are also being given apart from monetary compensation, they are being given a job to one of their members and family. And they're also being given a part of the redeveloped land in compensation. So 3 pillars: better compensation, more transparent compensation, jobs to an employee member, and part of the redeveloped land. This has made land acquisition slightly smoother, better. But government has clearly said that regional connectivity is a big issue and we will open no regional airports. So hopefully we will see healthy competition among states to acquire land and then give it out to the developers. Hopefully it answers some of your question. There's one more question, which is on tax cut of salaries. Sorry, do you want me to take that, or there's a new question?
We have some other questions. So before that, I'll ask Bhavesh one question, and then we have other questions coming from Eugene, Michael, and Olga, which we can look into. So before that, Veronica Elena Boki has said that you said that rail operations is a forbidden sector in India. What about the openness of rail supplies? Are there any specific legal or factual limitations? So I direct this next question to Mr. Bhavesh.
Thank you, Anushri. Thank you, Veronica, for asking such an important question. Yes, it's in terms of FDI, the foreign direct investment in the railway is the prohibited sector, where the railway operations are kept with the government of India, but the supplies for the railway is open as an ICB tendering process. For the foreign companies, they can also come into India and supply their products and services for the requirements of public procurement for the railway sectors. So there is no restriction for supplies to the railway sectors, but yes, the public and private partnerships in the railway operations is prohibited. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We're gonna be taking the last few questions, but we are running a little over time. But we'd love, since you guys are asking questions, we do want to answer all of them. So if it's okay with you, Tarun, we'd like to go ahead with few more questions that we're getting in.
No worries, Anushri. Keep the questions going.
Great.
And happy to extend, because I think these questions are very relevant and very, very opportune. And I would just like to add on the railway sector to support what Bhavesh said. This is one area where, apart from the operations, government is very open. And we have seen many equipment suppliers, OEMs like Siemens, Bombardier, Alstom, setting up their plants in India. We see a lot of foreign investment coming into signaling systems, into improving railways safety, including all the modernization in new tunneling techniques. So really, this sector, we have seen huge participation from foreign companies in the whole railway and metro sector. Going on, I'm just going question. Do you want me to take the question of Olga on the medical device first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Olga, yes, medical devices is a competitive sector. As I said, any sector in India, Olga, I can assure you is price competitive. Okay. And medical devices, we've seen consumables. However, the medical equipment sector, we've seen high value imports, especially in imaging equipment, X-ray equipment, dental equipment. But where we are seeing challenges even is that government has put a lot of devices under the compulsory pricing. What I mean by that, pricing related to, for example, intravenous stents, which go into heart, pricing related to ortho implants. These have been brought under compulsory pricing mechanism, which has been a bit of deterrent for foreign companies. But as long as your product, and do not know your product segment, as long as your product segment is not under these compulsory pricing mechanism, there could be an opportunity, because India imports 70% of its medical devices, and a lot of it, yeah, I think you mentioned medical consumables. Olga, if you are a manufacturer of medical consumables, that is the most competitive segment in India, and also dominated by imports from China. So yeah, that is extremely price competitive. We've seen very few products from OECD markets in the consumable sector. Does that answer? And then I can move on to Eugene's question.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead. And then after Eugene, we'll go back to Serdar's question on what kind of tax cuts out of salaries.
Yeah, I'll leave that for Bhavesh to answer, but I'll move on to Eugene's question.
Yes. Move on to Eugene's.
Yes, Eugene, exhibitions are gaining traction. They are improving in terms of the way they are handled. There's some way to go. And your segment, what you mentioned, is very interesting. Innovative products for distribution grids. In fact, the biggest exhibit, there are 2 or 3 big exhibitions. One is the Renew Expo, I think, which is held probably in August. Renewable Energy Expo. Then there is the India Electricity Show. So there are these 2 or 3 exhibitions related to your product segment. And another point to be noted, that Indian companies also participate in a lot of exhibitions in Dubai and Singapore and Germany. So it's possible that you will meet some potential partners in these exhibitions as well. And yeah, so for your segment, these 2 exhibitions could be interesting.
Great. The next question will be for Mr. Bhavesh. We're going to talk about, we're going back to Mr. Serdar, his question on what kind of tax cuts out of salaries.
Yeah, thank you, Anushri. Sardar, thank you for asking the question. On the tax cuts of salaries, there are various provisions as per Income Tax Act where as per the limits of the tax slabs prevailing in India, the tax is calculated over the salary. But yes, from that, there are various deductions and the benefits available to salaried people to invest their money into different investment as per the Income Tax Act permitted. And there are various exemptions and deductions available from the salary. Where we need to calculate according. So it's to summarize your question, we need to calculate. There are many things to be considered while calculating the taxable salary and the tax slab on it. The highest tax slab for any individual or a salaried person is the 30% if the income goes above 10 lakh rupees in Indian rupees. Apart from the tax rate of 30%, he needs to pay the 4% higher health and education cess. So 30 plus 4% of it will be the tax liability, but that will be calculated on the net taxable salary, considering the various deductions and exemptions available in the Act. So it is not possible as a time constraint to make you understand the various deductions and exemptions that are available in income tax, because it will take 2 to 3 more hours to explain that. So I hope if in case you have anything, you can email to me and I'll give you the calculation accordingly. Thank you very much. One more question is asked by Binu Nair. Hi, you have asked for the arm's length price and transfer price markup applicable for service industry or back office if the company is looking to set up India as a foreign company. So thank you, Binu, asking this question. Actually, I'm not a transfer pricing expert, but we have a team which can take up this question. So maybe, if you can provide me your email ID, I can email you the reply or the answer on this, by forwarding this question to my team member on transfer pricing. Thank you very much.
Great. This has been a really engaging Q&A. Thank you so much again for everyone's questions. We have one question that we missed by Mr. Richard Hughes. So Mr. Richard Hughes is asking any possibility of discussing challenges with B2B and government contracts. So Tarun, could you take this one?
Yeah, sure, Anushri. This is by gentleman. I'm just trying to get the name because this is probably a very, very nice question, and I'll address it.
Richard, yes.
Richard, the government sector has historically has been very negative connotation, and with my lot of sympathies if you are supplying to the government sector. Again, in view of the transparency of this current government, this government has started one of the biggest e-purchases platform for any government in the world. And if I remember my numbers correctly, we have over 30,000 suppliers, or more than that probably. It's the great Amazon of the Indian government market. So if you want to supply to the government, you want to look at that platform. It's called the Government Sourcing Platform. I don't remember the acronym. It's the Government Sourcing Platform. So if you look to supply to government, that would be your first port of call. And yes, it's difficult, but believe me, in the last 5 years, significant improvements have been made in terms of transparency and in terms of the way the contracts are awarded. And the second, in terms of the B2B, the portal is called GEM, is the Government e-marketplace. So you want to look at that after this presentation. For B2B, it's been generally relatively easier, again, depending on the sector. But what is important in the B2B, where we have seen foreign companies being more successful, is the companies who have a technologically superior product, where service is a very important criteria. After sales service is an important criteria. And also in terms of one of the challenges for B2B is a longer lead time for a sales cycle. Unlike Europe or US, where sales cycle tends to be smaller, in India, the sales cycle tends to be longer, which can be sometimes demotivating, discouraging. And quite often when you walk out of a meeting, you might think you have a deal in the bag, but that's not the case. It's very important that while you are discussing your transaction or a deal, you are pitching it to the decision maker. Quite often you are made to go through a lot of hoops, a lot of people who are not decision maker, but you have to again and again talk about sales spiel. And last point, no price is final till the end. Everybody is expected to give a discount even on a B2B at every level of discussion. And dare I say, even after the contract is done, it's not uncommon to go back and ask for a discount. So as long as we're aware of these challenges, B2B, but that's relatively, out of all the three segments, B2C or a government or a B2B, B2B is probably the most, I wouldn't know if it was the easier, but the most segment where companies would look at as an entry point into India.
Tarun, I would further add on the government contracts. Basically, Tenders Info is into the public procurement from past 19 years and has the experience of dealing with the government contracts. And we have clients across 100+ countries. So for Richard, you asked the question on the B2B and the government contracts. Where yes, of course, it is very difficult to deal with the government when in terms of tendering process is concerned, and but the companies like Tenders Info really help our foreign companies to bid for those tenders, and all the challenges that are faced by the companies are overcome by we have the team of experts of bid teams and bid facilitation team who really do the end-to-end assistance and consultancy to bid for those government tenders, and so that those companies can supply their products and services successfully to the government. So for yes, Richard, yes, I just wanted to add that point. If in case if you are looking for the government contracts in India, Tenders Info can really help you out. Thank you very much.
And thanks, Bhavesh. And Bhavesh, would you also agree that the process has become more transparent and easier in the last few years of government? So do you get that feedback from your clients on the ground as well?
Yes, Tarun. After Modi government's transparency aspect, which was on the center of the government, and the initiatives that they have taken place, including the various scams everybody is aware about the Congress government had in many past of years, were eliminated by Modi government. Bringing into the e-procurement and the transparency in place. As everybody knows, the ease of doing business. This is one of the factor, where the ranking of India goes up with this kind of transparency in the contract, that has been awarded by the government in various sectors. So one can look up to India, for the kind of a transparency they look for, without any biasness or kind of fishy things happening in the government contracts. This has really improved a lot in past 5 to 6 years. And that is what the experience of our clients also when we get the feedback from them. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's another question which I see on European laboratory uh, equipment manufacturer. I see that question. Um, this is something we've done some work, in fact, with a Nordic customer on laboratory equipment as well as laboratory reagents. And yes, Make in India, there's a big focus. In fact, we have certain specific zones which are related to medical, healthcare, and laboratory. And this is something which would be really encouraged in India. And why I say that is I do not know your line of laboratory. I'm presuming would be catered either to the hospitals or pathology labs or colleges. But this is an area where we've seen big interest from companies to look at assembly line in India, and could definitely be part of the Make in India initiative. But I would caution, I would not base my India strategy on the incentives available. That will be like cherry on the cake, but the business case should stand on its own merits. Thank you.
Oh, great. This has been exciting. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we have completed all of our questions. We just want to say, again, thank you so much for all of us joining from all parts of the world. We have a small request. Once you do exit, you'll be prompted a feedback questionnaire. So it'll take only a few minutes of your time, but it'll really enable us to do more webinars like this and bring on panelists that really have expert knowledge in this domain. So we really request 2 minutes of your time. And with that, I'd really like to conclude this webinar. If you guys have any questions, I know there were a lot of people who wanted to follow up. Please send an email to ria.p at tendersinfo. I'm also adding her email to the chat section. So again, this is an email for you to kind of reach out with any of your questions, and then we can redirect you to the right appropriate member at our team. And of course, Tarun Gupta's company also is really dealing in this in the same space. So, he's also a great person that can really reach out to you regarding TNA consulting. So TNA Tenders Info, we're really happy to have you. And again, thank you.